At 45, she was still a virgin. When he discovered the reason, his life changed forever. The black sedan pulled up to the old temple just as the evening bells began to chime. Marcus Blackwell stepped out, his Italian leather shoes touching the worn cobblestones for the first time in 25 years. The air smelled different here, incense and jasmine flowers mixed with something else, something he couldn't name but remembered in his bones. His grandmother's funeral had brought him back to Millbrook Falls, the small town he'd abandoned the moment he turned 18, swearing never to return. But here he was, adjusting his Armani suit and trying not to think about why his hands were shaking. The temple doors stood open, warm golden light spilling onto the steps. Marcus had built an empire worth $3 billion by never hesitating, never looking back. Yet now, staring at those familiar wooden doors, he felt like that scared teenager again, the one who'd left everything behind, including her. He walked up the steps, each one feeling heavier than the last. The Festival of Lanterns was in full swing inside. Dozens of paper lanterns in reds, golds, and blues floated from the ceiling, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The smell of sandalwood hit him like a memory he'd tried to forget. This was where he'd first kissed Sarah Chen, hidden behind the altar 27 years ago, both of them 16 and trembling with first love. His grandmother's casket sat at the front, surrounded by white lilies. Marcus made his way through the crowd, nodding politely at faces he half remembered. Mrs. Patterson from the bakery, old Mr. Williams who taught him to fish. They all looked older, grayer, but their eyes held the same warmth he remembered. The same warmth he'd convinced himself was just small-town pretense. Then he saw her. Sarah stood near the prayer candles, lighting one with steady hands. She wore a simple navy dress that probably cost $50, her long black hair pulled back in the same ponytail she'd worn in high school. No makeup, no jewelry except for a small silver cross at her throat. She looked exactly the same, except for the tiny lines around her eyes that somehow made her even more beautiful. Their eyes met across the crowded temple. Time stopped. The chanting of the monks faded, the shuffling of feet, the whispered prayers, the crying of babies. Everything disappeared until there was only her face and the shock in her dark eyes. She recognized him instantly, and he watched her lips part slightly in surprise. Marcus felt his chest tighten. 25 years of board meetings, mergers, hostile takeovers, and billion-dollar deals, and none of it had prepared him for this moment. Sarah Chen still took his breath away. She looked away first, her cheeks flushing pink. She finished lighting her candle and started to move toward the back of the temple, clearly trying to avoid him. But Marcus had spent decades learning how to get what he wanted, and right now, he wanted to talk to her more than he'd wanted anything in years. He intercepted her path near the donation table, his heart pounding like he was 16 again. "Sarah." She stopped, her hands clasped in front of her. When she looked up, he saw something in her eyes that made his throat dry up. Not anger, not resentment. Something sadder, something that looked almost like hope. "Hello, Marcus." Her voice was softer than he remembered, worn smooth by years of teaching children. "I'm sorry about your grandmother. She was a wonderful woman. Thank you." He stood there like an idiot, staring at her face. Up close, he could see she was 45 now, same as him. But where he'd gained weight and lost hair and earned stress lines from building his empire, she seemed untouched by time, peaceful, content. "You look older?" She smiled, and it was the same smile that had haunted his dreams for decades. "Beautiful," he finished, and watched her blush deepen. "You look beautiful." An awkward silence stretched between them. Around them, the temple buzzed with conversation and prayer, but Marcus felt like they were in a bubble, separate from everything else. Sarah fidgeted with her purse strap, clearly uncomfortable. "I should go," she said finally. "My mother is waiting for me at home." "Your mother?" Marcus felt a stab of something he couldn't identify. "You still live with your parents?" "Just my mother." Sarah's voice grew quieter. "My father passed away 8 years ago. Mom has early-stage dementia, so I take care of her." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Sarah had sacrificed her life to care for her mother. While he'd been building his empire, sleeping with models and actresses, buying houses he never lived in, Sarah had been here, taking care of family, being good, being pure. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I didn't know about your father. How could you?" There was no bitterness in her voice, just simple fact. You never came back. The accusation hung in the air between them. Marcus opened his mouth to explain, to defend himself, to say something that would make sense of why he'd run away and never looked back. But what could he say? That he'd been a coward? That he'd been so afraid of this small town, so desperate to escape the poverty and limitations, that he'd abandoned the only person who'd ever loved him for who he was, instead of what he could become? I couldn't, he said instead, the words scraping his throat raw. I had to leave. You know I had to leave. Sarah studied his face for a long moment. I know, she said finally. I understand why you left, Marcus. I just never understood why you never came back. Before he could answer, an elderly woman approached them. Marcus recognized her as Mrs. Chen, Sarah's mother, though she looked frailer than he remembered. Her hair was completely white now, and she walked with a cane. Sarah, dear, who is this handsome young man? Mrs. Chen's voice was still strong, but there was a vagueness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Mom, this is Marcus Blackwell. Do you remember? From school? Mrs. Chen's face lit up with sudden recognition. Marcus, oh my goodness, little Marcus Blackwell. Look how tall and handsome you've become. She reached out and patted his arm with surprising strength. Sarah, you didn't tell me Marcus was back in town. I didn't know, Sarah said quietly. Well, you must come to dinner, Mrs. Chen declared. Sarah makes the most wonderful dumplings, just like I taught her. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. Don't you dare say no, young man. Marcus looked at Sarah, who seemed mortified by her mother's invitation. Her cheeks were bright red, and she was shaking her head slightly. Mom, I'm sure Marcus is very busy. I'd love to come, Marcus said, surprising himself. If that's okay with you, Sarah. Sarah stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You want to have dinner with us? Yes. The word came out more forcefully than he'd intended. I mean, if it's not too much trouble, I'd really like that. Mrs. Chen clapped her hands together in delight. Wonderful. It will be just like old times. Sarah, dear, remember how Marcus used to help you with your math homework at our kitchen table? Marcus saw Sarah's face soften at the memory. They'd spent countless afternoons at that table, supposedly studying, but mostly just talking and stealing glances at each other. He'd loved those afternoons. They'd been the brightest part of his otherwise difficult childhood. I remember, Sarah said softly. Then it's settled, Mrs. Chen announced. Tomorrow at 7. And Marcus, don't you dare bring anything expensive. We're simple people. The warning in her voice was gentle but clear. Marcus nodded, understanding perfectly. Whatever he'd become, whoever he was now, it didn't matter in this moment. What mattered was that somehow, impossibly, he was being invited back into Sarah's life. I wouldn't dream of it, he promised. As Mrs. Chen wandered away to greet other temple members, Marcus found himself alone with Sarah again. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You don't have to come, she said quietly. I know this isn't your world anymore. What if I want it to be? The words slipped out before he could stop them. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise, and Marcus felt his face burn with embarrassment. What was wrong with him? He was acting like a lovesick teenager. Marcus, I know how that sounds, he said quickly. I know I have no right to show up here after 25 years and say something like that, but seeing you again, God, Sarah, I forgot how it felt to be around you. How what felt? Like I'm actually myself instead of just playing a role. Sarah stared at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Who are you now, Marcus? Really? It was a simple question, but it hit him like a physical blow. Who was he? Marcus Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Industries. Marcus Blackwell, who owned houses in Manhattan, Los Angeles, and the Hamptons. Marcus Blackwell, who dated supermodels and had his picture in Forbes magazine. Marcus Blackwell, who had everything he'd ever thought he wanted and felt empty inside most days. I don't know, he admitted. I thought I did, but standing here with you, I don't know anymore. The honesty in his voice seemed to surprise her. Sarah's expression softened, and for just a moment he caught a glimpse of the girl who'd loved him so completely all those years ago. I should go, she said again, but she didn't move. Sarah, can I ask you something? She nodded. Are you happy? The question hung in the air between them. Sarah looked down at her hands, and Marcus waited, his heart pounding. I have a good life, she said finally. I teach at the elementary school. I take care of my mother. I volunteer at the food bank on weekends. I have friends and my students love me, and I know I'm making a difference in people's lives. That's not what I asked. Sarah met his eyes. I know. The admission broke something open in Marcus's chest. All these years he'd told himself that leaving was the right thing to do, that Sarah would find someone else, get married, have children, live a full and happy life. He'd never imagined that she'd still be here. Still single, still waiting for something that might never come. Why didn't you ever marry? He asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Sarah was quiet for so long that he thought she wasn't going to respond. When she finally spoke, her voice was so soft he had to lean closer to hear her. I tried to love other people, she said. There were good men who wanted to marry me. Kind men who would have taken care of me and my mother, but every time when it came down to it, I couldn't say yes. Something always held me back. What? Sarah looked up at him, and the pain in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. I think you know what. The temple bells chimed again, signaling the end of the evening service. People began filing out around them, but Marcus barely noticed. He was staring at Sarah, trying to process what she'd just told him. She'd waited. All these years she'd been waiting. Sarah, I have to go, she said quickly, backing away from him. My mother gets confused if I'm gone too long after dark. Wait. Marcus reached out and caught her hand. The touch was electric, sending shocks up his arm. Sarah gasped softly and tried to pull away, but he held on. Please, will you be there tomorrow night? Really? Sarah looked down at their joined hands, and Marcus held his breath. Finally, she nodded. 7 o'clock, she said. And Marcus? Yeah? Don't come in a suit. We're having dinner, not a business meeting. With that, she gently pulled her hand from his and walked away, leaving Marcus standing alone in the emptying temple. He watched her go, noting the way she moved, still graceful after all these years. At the door, she turned back and caught him staring. For just a moment, she smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Then she was gone. Marcus stood there for several minutes after she left, his hand still tingling where she'd touched him. 25 years he'd spent convincing himself that what they'd had was just teenage infatuation, that he'd built it up in his memory into something more than it really was. 25 years of telling himself that leaving her had been necessary, even noble, but seeing her again, talking to her, touching her hand, Marcus knew with crystal clarity that he'd been lying to himself all along. What he'd felt for Sarah wasn't teenage infatuation. It was love, pure and simple. The kind of love that only came once in a lifetime, and he'd been stupid enough to walk away from it. The question now was whether it was too late to get it back. As Marcus finally left the temple, stepping out into the cool evening air, he caught sight of his reflection in the glass doors. He looked exactly like what he was. A rich, successful businessman in an expensive suit. Everything Sarah wasn't and had never wanted to be. Tomorrow night, he'd sit at her mother's kitchen table and try to figure out if there was any part of the boy she'd once loved still left inside the man he'd become. And maybe, if he was incredibly lucky, he'd find out if there was any part of her that might be willing to love him again. But as he walked to his car, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to discover something that would change everything, something that would force him to make choices he'd never imagined having to make. Something that would either save him or destroy everything he'd spent his life building. Marcus spent the entire next day pacing his hotel room like a caged animal. He'd changed clothes 6 times, finally settling on dark jeans and a simple blue button-down shirt. No tie, no cufflinks, no watch that cost more than most people's cars. He wanted to look normal, approachable, like the boy Sarah had once known, but every time he caught his reflection, all he saw was a fraud playing dress-up. At 6:45, he stood outside the small white house on Maple Street, holding a single bouquet of daisies from the local grocery store. His hands were sweating worse than before his first billion-dollar merger. Through the kitchen window, he could see Sarah moving around, setting the table. She'd changed into a soft yellow sundress that made her look even younger than she had at the temple. He knocked, and his heart nearly stopped when she opened the door. "You came," she said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "Honestly, part of me thought you'd come to your senses and leave town." Sarah stepped aside to let him in. "This isn't exactly your usual scene." Marcus looked around the small living room. Nothing had changed since he was 16. The same floral couch, the same family photos on the mantel, the same hand-crocheted doilies on every surface. But instead of feeling cramped or outdated, it felt like coming home. "Maybe my usual scene isn't working for me anymore," he said quietly. Sarah studied his face, searching for something. Whatever she found there made her expression soften. "Mum's in the kitchen," she said. "She's been cooking all day. Fair warning, she made enough food for 20 people. "Sarah, dear, is that Marcus?" Mrs. Chen's voice called from the kitchen. "Bring him in here right now." Marcus followed Sarah through the familiar hallway, past the same family photos he remembered from high school. There was one of Sarah at her college graduation, beaming in her cap and gown. Another of her with a classroom full of kindergartners. But no wedding photos, no pictures of boyfriends or dates or romantic trips. Just Sarah, alone, surrounded by family and students and friends, but always alone. Mrs. Chen stood at the stove, stirring something that smelled incredible. She'd dressed up for the occasion in a purple blouse and her best pearls, though Marcus noticed her hands shook slightly as she cooked. "Marcus, look at you, so handsome." She wiped her hands on her apron and hugged him tightly. "I was just telling Sarah how you used to help me in the garden when you were little. Do you remember? You had such gentle hands with the flowers." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He'd forgotten about those afternoons in Mrs. Chen's garden, learning to tend her prize-winning roses while Sarah did homework on the porch. The Chen house had been his refuge when things got bad at home, when his father was drinking and his mother was working double shifts to pay the bills. "I remember," he managed. "Your roses were always the most beautiful in the neighborhood." "Still are," Mrs. Chen beamed. "Sarah takes care of them now. She has the same gentle touch." Dinner was a revelation. Mrs. Chen had made all of Marcus's favorite dishes from childhood, things he hadn't tasted in 25 years. Pork dumplings, sweet and sour chicken, fried rice with tiny pieces of egg, scrambled throughout. Simple food, made with love, that tasted better than anything from the five-star restaurants he usually frequented. But more than the food, it was the conversation that got to him. Mrs. Chen told stories about Sarah's teaching career, how she'd been voted Teacher of the Year 3 times, how parents specifically requested their children be placed in her class. Sarah talked about her students with such warmth and passion that Marcus found himself hanging on every word. "Tell him about little Tommy Rodriguez," Mrs. Chen urged. "The one who wouldn't speak English when he first came to your class." Sarah blushed. "Mum, he doesn't want to hear about that." "Actually, I do," Marcus said. "Tell me." Sarah looked at him uncertainly, then began to speak about a shy immigrant boy who'd arrived in her class speaking no English and terrified of everything. She'd spent months earning his trust, learning basic Spanish phrases to communicate with him, staying after school to help him with homework. By the end of the year, he was speaking fluent English and had made the honor roll. "He's in high school now," Sarah said softly. "He stops by sometimes to tell me about his grades. He wants to be a teacher because of what you showed him, he always says." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. While he'd been building his empire, calculating profit margins and crushing competitors, Sarah had been here changing lives one child at a time. The difference between them felt insurmountable. "That's incredible," he said. "You're incredible." Sarah looked down at her plate, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just do my job." "No, you don't," Marcus said firmly. "You do so much more than your job. You care about people. You make a difference." "You—" He trailed off, realizing how intense his voice had become. An awkward silence fell over the table. Mrs. Chen looked between them with sharp eyes, clearly sensing undercurrents she didn't fully understand. "Marcus, dear," she said finally, "tell us about your life. Sarah says you're very successful now." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. How could he explain his world to these women? The hostile takeovers, the board meetings, the endless pursuit of profit, the emptiness that came with having everything but feeling nothing. "I run a company," he said carefully. "We buy other companies and try to make them more efficient." "That sounds important," Mrs. Chen said. "Are you married? Children?" The question hit like a physical blow. Marcus felt Sarah tense beside him, clearly dreading his answer. "No," he said quietly. "No wife, no children." "Well, why not?" Mrs. Chen demanded with the bluntness of age. A handsome, successful man like you. Don't tell me you haven't had opportunities. Marcus glanced at Sarah, who was staring intently at her food. I've had opportunities, I never found the right person. It was a lie. He'd had plenty of opportunities with beautiful, intelligent women, models, actresses, fellow CEOs. He'd dated some of them for months, even lived with a few. But every time things got serious, every time they started talking about marriage and the future, he'd found an excuse to end it. Because none of them had been Sarah. None of them had ever been Sarah. Well, you're still young, Mrs. Chen said. 45 isn't too old to start a family. Is it, Sarah? Sarah's cheeks turned bright red. Mom, please. What? I'm just saying. Neither of you is getting any younger. Time doesn't wait for anyone. The dinner conversation moved on to safer topics after that. But Marcus couldn't shake Mrs. Chen's words. Neither of you is getting any younger. Time doesn't wait for anyone. How much time had he already wasted? How much time did he have left? After dinner, Sarah walked him to the door while Mrs. Chen settled into her recliner to watch her evening shows. They stood on the front porch, surrounded by the sound of crickets and the scent of jasmine from the garden. Thank you for coming, Sarah said. It meant a lot to her. She doesn't get many visitors anymore. What about you? Marcus asked. Did it mean anything to you? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the street where they'd once ridden bikes and played tag and shared their first kiss behind the old oak tree. It felt like going back in time, she admitted. Like we were 16 again and you were walking me home from school. Would that be so bad, going back? We can't go back, Marcus. Too much has changed. Have we changed? Really? Marcus stepped closer to her, close enough to smell her shampoo, something simple and clean that made his head spin. Because sitting at that table tonight, listening to you talk about your students, watching you take care of your mother, you're exactly the same person I fell in love with all those years ago. Sarah's breath caught. Marcus, I'm not the same, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. I know I'm not. I've done things, become someone I'm not sure I like very much, but being here with you, I feel like maybe I could remember who I used to be, who I wanted to be before everything got so complicated. What are you saying? Marcus reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the simple touch sending electricity through both of them. I'm saying that leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. I'm saying that not a day has gone by in 25 years that I haven't thought about you. I'm saying that I love you, Sarah. I never stopped loving you. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. You can't just show up here and say things like that. You can't just walk back into my life and expect everything to be the same. I don't expect anything, Marcus said desperately. I need you to know how I feel. I need you to know that if I could do it all over again, I would never have left. But you did leave, Sarah whispered. You left and you never looked back, and you built this whole life without me. A life worth billions of dollars. What could I possibly offer you that you don't already have? Everything, Marcus said simply. You could offer me everything that matters. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Then, suddenly, she was kissing him. Her lips were soft and warm and tasted like the tea they'd shared after dinner. Marcus felt 25 years of emptiness fill up in an instant, felt his heart start beating again after years of just going through the motions. The kiss was gentle, tentative, full of years of longing and loss. When they finally broke apart, both of them were trembling. I should go inside, Sarah whispered, but she didn't move away from him. Sarah, I need to tell you something. About why I really came back. She looked up at him, confusion in her eyes. What do you mean? Marcus took a deep breath. This was the moment he'd been dreading, but she deserved the truth. My grandmother left me her house and some property in her will, but there are conditions. I have to live here in Millbrook Falls for at least 1 year, and I have to use part of the inheritance for community development projects. Sarah stepped back, hurt flashing across her face. So you're only here because you have to be? No, Marcus said quickly. That's not... Sarah, I could have contested the will. I could have had my lawyers find a way around the conditions. I have enough money that I don't need my grandmother's inheritance. But when I read those conditions, something inside me jumped at the chance to come back. Like maybe the universe was giving me a second chance. A second chance at what? At the life I should have lived. At being the man I should have become. At loving the woman I should never have left. Sarah searched his face, looking for deception. What about your company? Your life in New York? I can run the company from anywhere. Most of my work is done virtually anyway. And as for my life in New York, Marcus shrugged. What life? I live in a penthouse apartment that feels like a museum. I eat dinner alone most nights. I haven't had a real conversation with anyone in months. That's not a life, Sarah. That's just existing. So you want to give all that up? For what? To come back to a small town where nothing ever changes? To be with a woman who teaches kindergarten and takes care of her sick mother? There was pain in her voice, a deep hurt that told Marcus how worthless she felt compared to his glamorous city life. It broke his heart. I want to give it up for the chance to matter again, he said fiercely. For the chance to wake up every morning with purpose instead of just profit margins. For the chance to love someone who loves me back, not my bank account. Sarah, you have no idea how empty my life has become. You think I'm giving something up to be here? I'm gaining everything. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. This is crazy. We barely know each other anymore. Then let's get to know each other again. Let me stay, Sarah. Let me prove to you that I can be the man you deserve. Before Sarah could answer, the porch light flickered and Mrs. Chen's voice called from inside. Sarah? Is everything all right out there? I have to go, Sarah said quickly. Mom gets anxious if she can't see me. Will I see you again? Tomorrow? Sarah hesitated, her hand on the door handle. I don't know, Marcus. This is all so fast, so overwhelming. I need time to think. How much time? I don't know that either. Marcus felt panic rise in his chest. He'd just found her again, confessed his love, kissed her for the first time in 25 years. He couldn't lose her now. What if I told you that you're not the only one who waited? He said desperately. Sarah froze. What do you mean? I mean that I've never been able to love anyone else either. Not really. I've tried. God knows I've tried. But every woman I've ever been with has been a pale imitation of you. I've spent 25 years looking for someone who could make me feel the way you did, and I never found her because she was here all along. Sarah turned back to face him, her eyes wide with shock. Marcus, there's something else, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Something I need you to know before you decide whether to see me again. What? Marcus felt his face burn with embarrassment, but he forced himself to say the words. I've never, with all those women, I couldn't. He took a shaky breath. I'm not the playboy everyone thinks I am, Sarah. I couldn't be because every time it mattered, every time it could have been real, I thought of you and I couldn't go through with it. The admission hung in the air between them like a live wire. Sarah stared at him in complete shock, her lips parted in surprise. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Marcus nodded, unable to speak. Sarah's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they looked different, softer, full of something that might have been hope. Oh, Marcus, she whispered. Sarah, dear, what's taking so long? Mrs. Chen's voice was getting more agitated. I really have to go, Sarah said, but her voice was gentler now. But Marcus, come to the school tomorrow, 3:30. I'll be in my classroom grading papers. Are you sure? No, Sarah said honestly. I'm not sure of anything right now, but I think we need to talk more about everything. Marcus felt hope bloom in his chest like a flower opening to the sun. I'll be there, Sarah smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her since they'd reconnected. Don't wear a suit. Wouldn't dream of it. She went inside then, leaving Marcus standing alone on the porch. But this time, instead of feeling lost and empty, he felt alive, more alive than he'd felt in years. As he walked to his car, Marcus caught sight of a black sedan parked across the street. His blood ran cold when he recognized the man sitting behind the wheel. James Morrison, his head of security, who was supposed to be in New York handling a crisis at one of his subsidiaries. The car pulled away before Marcus could react, but the message was clear. His old life had found him. And if James was here, it meant the board of directors knew where he was and what he was doing, which meant his time might be running out faster than he'd thought. Marcus spent the night staring at the ceiling of his hotel room, his mind racing. James Morrison's presence could only mean one thing. The board was getting nervous about his extended absence. 3 weeks without him physically present in New York was apparently too long for their comfort. But what worried him more was what they might do if they discovered the real reason he was staying. At 3:15 the next afternoon, He stood outside Millbrook Falls Elementary School, watching children stream out of the building with their backpacks and lunchboxes. Some of them stared at him curiously, probably wondering what a grown man in jeans and a polo shirt was doing loitering near their school. He felt like a fraud among all this innocence and simplicity. The building was exactly as he remembered it. Red brick, white trim, a playground with swings that squeaked in the afternoon breeze. He'd attended this school through 6th grade before his family's financial troubles forced them to move to the rough side of town. Some of his happiest childhood memories had happened within these walls. At exactly 3:30, he walked through the front doors. The hallways smelled like disinfectant and childhood dreams. Construction paper artwork lined the walls, bright and cheerful reminders of young minds at work. He found Sarah's classroom at the end of the kindergarten wing, her name written in colorful letters on the door, Miss Chen's class. She was sitting at her desk when he knocked, surrounded by stacks of papers and crayon drawings. When she looked up and saw him, her face lit up with a smile that made his chest tight. "You came," she said, just like the night before. "You asked me to. I wasn't sure you would. After last night, after everything we said." Marcus stepped into the classroom, feeling like a giant among the tiny desks and chairs. The walls were covered with alphabet charts and number lines, students' artwork and photos of field trips. It was Sarah's world, completely and utterly, and he felt like an intruder. "Sarah, about last night, what I told you about never being with anyone else." "You don't have to explain," she said quickly. "I understand if it was too much information, too personal." "No." Marcus moved closer to her desk. "That's not what I was going to say. I was going to say that I've never told anyone that before. Ever. And I need you to know that I didn't tell you to manipulate you or make you feel sorry for me. I told you because I wanted you to understand that what we had, what I felt for you, it wasn't just teenage infatuation, it was real. It was so real that it ruined me for anyone else." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Marcus, I need to tell you something too." The tone of her voice made his stomach drop. "What?" "Yesterday, when I said I tried to love other people but couldn't, there's more to it than that." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the playground where children used to play during recess. "I've never been with anyone either. Not in that way." Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis. "What? I'm 45 years old and I've never..." Sarah's voice broke. "Everyone thinks I'm this spinster school teacher who just never found the right guy. But the truth is I never even tried. Not really. Because how could I let another man touch me when my heart belonged to someone who left and never came back?" The confession hit Marcus like a physical blow. All these years, while he'd been struggling with his own inability to connect with other women, she'd been here completely alone, completely untouched, waiting for him. The weight of that sacrifice, that devotion, nearly brought him to his knees. "Sarah." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, melting against his chest like she belonged there. "I'm so sorry. I'm so damn sorry." "For what?" "For leaving you. For staying away. For wasting 25 years we could have had together." Sarah pulled back to look at his face. "We can't change the past, Marcus. The question is what we do now." Before Marcus could answer, there was a knock on the classroom door. They sprang apart just as Principal Williams poked his head in. Marcus recognized him immediately, though he'd aged considerably since Marcus's elementary school days. "Miss Chen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see." Principal Williams stopped mid-sentence when he saw Marcus. "Well, I'll be damned, Marcus Blackwell." "Hello, Mr. Williams. I heard you were back in town, but I didn't believe it." Principal Williams stepped into the classroom, shaking his head in amazement. "Look at you, all grown up and successful. Sarah was just telling me about your business empire." Marcus glanced at Sarah, wondering what exactly she'd said about him. "It's good to see you again, sir." "Sir?" Principal Williams laughed. "You're probably worth more than this entire town now. I should be calling you sir." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Marcus hated when people talked about his money like it was the most interesting thing about him. It made him feel like that was all he was worth, all anyone could see when they looked at him. "Actually," Principal Williams continued, "since you're here, maybe I could talk to you about something. We're facing some budget cuts that might force us to eliminate the art and music programs. I don't suppose a successful businessman like yourself might be interested in making a donation. Dad, stop. The voice came from the doorway, and Marcus turned to see a young woman in her 30s standing there with an embarrassed expression. She had Principal Williams's eyes, but was clearly much more tactful than her father. Marcus, this is my daughter, Jennifer, Principal Williams said proudly. She's the vice principal here. Jenny, this is Marcus Blackwell, Sarah's friend from high school. Jennifer Williams stepped forward with a professional smile. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Blackwell. Please ignore my father. He has no filter when it comes to fundraising. It's fine, Marcus said, though he was already thinking about how he could help the school without making Sarah uncomfortable. I'd actually be very interested in hearing more about your programs. Really? Principal Williams's eyes lit up. Well, that's wonderful. Sarah, you didn't tell me your friend was interested in education. Marcus caught Sarah's eye and saw the warning there. She was clearly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was taking. He understood why. The last thing she wanted was for people to think she was using their relationship to benefit the school. I should go, Marcus said quickly. Sarah, thank you for letting me visit your classroom. Maybe we could continue our conversation later. Of course, Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. As Marcus headed for the door, Jennifer Williams stepped aside to let him pass. Mr. Blackwell, if you're serious about learning more about our programs, I'd be happy to give you a tour sometime. No pressure, no fundraising pitch, just information. I'd like that, Marcus said honestly. Sarah, I'll call you later? She nodded, and Marcus left the school feeling like he was walking on air. Sarah's confession had changed everything. She hadn't moved on, hadn't found someone else, hadn't forgotten about him any more than he'd forgotten about her. They were both damaged in the same way, broken by the same loss, preserved by the same love. But as he reached his car, his phone rang. The caller ID made his blood run cold. Victoria Sterling, the ice queen of his board of directors and his most vocal critic. Victoria, he answered, trying to keep his voice neutral. Marcus, darling. Her voice was smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. I hear you're playing house in some quaint little town. How delightfully rustic of you. I'm handling family business, my grandmother's estate. For 3 weeks? Really, Marcus? How much hand-holding can one estate require? Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Victoria had been trying to undermine his authority for years, waiting for any sign of weakness she could exploit. Is there something specific you need, Victoria? Actually, yes. The Henderson merger is falling apart without you here to charm their CEO. Apparently, video conferences aren't sufficient for deals of this magnitude. Who knew? Her tone was mock-sympathetic, but Marcus could hear the satisfaction underneath. I'll handle it from here. I'm sure you will. But Marcus, darling, the board is getting restless. Some of us are beginning to wonder if your little sabbatical is affecting your judgment. There's been talk of calling a vote of no confidence. The threat hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. A vote of no confidence could remove him as CEO, strip him of his control over the company he'd built from nothing. It would mean losing everything he'd worked for, everything that defined him in the business world. You don't have the votes, he said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. Don't I? James Morrison had some very interesting things to say about your activities in Millbrook Falls, something about romantic entanglements with local women. Really, Marcus, I thought you had better taste. The casual cruelty in her voice made Marcus see red. Be very careful, Victoria. Or what? You'll fire me from 1,000 miles away? Face it, darling, you're losing your grip. The company needs someone who's actually present, someone who puts business before pleasure. The board meeting is scheduled for next Monday. I suggest you decide what's more important to you, your little fantasy in small-town America, or the empire you've spent your life building. The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at his phone in fury and panic. Victoria was right about one thing. He was losing his grip, but not on the company, on everything that actually mattered. His phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. Dinner tonight? Mom wants to cook for you again. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the reply button. He could go back to New York, handle the Henderson merger, placate the board, maintain his position as CEO. He could choose the safe path, the familiar path, the path that led to billions of dollars and complete emotional emptiness. Or he could choose Sarah. He could choose love and hope and the possibility of a life that actually meant something. He typed back, I'd love to, what time? 3 hours later, he was back at the Chen house, but this time the atmosphere was different. Mrs. Chen seemed more confused than she had the night before, asking him 3 times who he was and why he was there. Sarah looked exhausted, worn down by the constant vigilance required to care for someone with dementia. "Bad day?" Marcus asked quietly as Sarah walked him to the door after dinner. "They're all bad days now," Sarah admitted. "Some are just worse than others. The doctor says she's progressing faster than expected. We might have to start looking at care facilities soon." "How much does that cost?" Sarah gave him a sharp look. "Why?" "I'm just curious. I want to understand what you're dealing with." "About $4,000 a month for a decent place. More for the really good ones." Sarah's voice was flat, resigned. "I've been saving for years, but it's still not enough. And with the school budget cuts, there's talk of teacher layoffs. I might not even have a job much longer." Marcus felt something break inside his chest. While he'd been playing corporate games and accumulating meaningless wealth, Sarah had been struggling with real problems, real fears, real sacrifices. The contrast made him sick. "Sarah, let me help." "No." Her response was immediate and firm. "Absolutely not." "Why not?" "I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes." "Let me help with your mother's care. Let me donate to the school." "Because that's not what I want from you." Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. "Don't you see? If you start paying for everything, if you start fixing all my problems with your money, then what am I to you? Just another charity case, another project. That's not how I see you, isn't it? The poor school teacher who needs rescuing by the rich businessman. The sad spinster who waited her whole life for you to come back and save her." Marcus stepped closer, desperate to make her understand. "Sarah, that's not... I need to know that you want me for me," she continued, tears streaming down her face. "Not because you feel sorry for me, not because you want to play hero, but because you actually love the woman I am, the woman I became without you. I do love you, exactly as you are. Then prove it." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Don't try to fix my life, Marcus. Just be part of it." Before Marcus could respond, his phone rang again. This time it was James Morrison. "Don't answer it," Sarah said, seeing the tension in his face. But Marcus was already looking at the caller ID, already feeling the weight of his other life pressing down on him. "I have to. It might be important." "More important than this conversation?" Marcus hesitated, his thumb hovering over the answer button. In that moment of hesitation, he saw something die in Sarah's eyes. "Answer it," she said quietly. "I understand." "Sarah, wait." But she was already closing the door, already walking away from him again. And this time, Marcus wasn't sure she'd give him another chance. He answered the phone with shaking hands. "We have a problem." James's voice was grim. "Victoria Sterling has been calling board members all evening. She's got the votes, Marcus. If you're not back by Monday, you're out." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the walls of his old life closing in around him. "How many votes?" 6 out of 10 confirmed. Maybe 7. "It's over unless you come back right now and start doing damage control." Marcus looked back at the Chen house, at the warm yellow light spilling from the kitchen window, where Sarah was probably cleaning up dinner dishes while her mother watched TV. A simple life, a real life, a life where he could matter for reasons that had nothing to do with profit margins or stock prices. "Marcus, are you there?" "I'm here," Marcus said finally. "So, when should I book your flight?" Marcus stared at the house for another long moment, memorizing every detail. The white picket fence, the rose garden, the porch where he'd kissed Sarah for the first time in 25 years. The life he could have if he was brave enough to choose it. "Marcus, book the flight," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I'll be on the first plane out tomorrow morning." As Marcus walked to his car, he didn't see Sarah watching from the kitchen window, tears streaming down her face as she watched him drive away. He didn't see her mother take her hand and squeeze it gently, a moment of perfect clarity in the fog of dementia. "He'll be back," Mrs. Chen said softly. "Some men have to lose everything before they learn what matters, but he'll be back." Sarah wanted to believe her mother was right. But as she watched Marcus's taillights disappear into the darkness, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just lost him all over again. And this time, she didn't think her heart could survive it.